I'm Ben Spagan. I'm the Vice President here at the Jefferson Educational Society. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you tonight and to be here for this event, a real celebration of market accomplishment that we'll talk about and get into tonight. But before we do that, a few housekeeping things. I was chatting with a few of you on the way in, and I thought maybe I'll just remove myself as moderator and let you all ask the questions tonight, because you've done all the reading, you know the folks on stage, but I'll ask some questions, but we do want you to participate. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll signal about 45 to 60 minutes in. Raise your hand. One of our team members will come with a microphone. Please do wait for the microphone for your questions. It's important because, one, we want to be able to hear your excellent questions. Two, for folks that are tuning in virtually, this is the only way they're going to be able to hear your question as well. So we do ask you wait for the microphone. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can before we turn to the celebratory nature of today's gathering, as we celebrate two of our scholars and our famed publications division director as well. But aside from tonight, we've got other things coming up, and I'm here to help you make plans for the rest of your week and beyond. We do take a break tomorrow. That's really important to us that we take a break tomorrow, because what's happening tomorrow? Election day, right? So practice democracy. We don't want to interfere with that. So nothing happening here, for programming. So please do go and vote if you haven't already. Engage with candidates. Practice democracy. It is a practice, and it takes us, the residents and citizens, to be a part of that. Wednesday, however, we are back, and we're really excited because we were excited for this program last fall. This was originally scheduled for the Global Summit. We were excited to bring in Erie legend and Hall of Famer Fred Bolitnikoff. Unfortunately, a few medical incidents and some caution and rescheduling led to this event being in May. So we are now very excited to bring him here on Wednesday. That's at 7 o'clock. He will receive the Thomas B. Hagen Dignitas Award and following the line of many, which started with Steve Scully back in 2011. So we're having a Global Summit program in the spring term. Still some tickets available for that, 7 o'clock here. On Thursday, we head to the Erie Center for Arts and Technology as part of our satellite programming initiative. There we have a chance to hear again from Mr. Richard Arthur, who's been doing a series on Lafayette. It's the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's farewell tour, which included a stop in Erie, Pennsylvania on June 3rd. That's coming up, not his stop, but the date. But he'll be at ECAT to talk to you about Lafayette, founding father and American citizen. He received his citizenship much later, so you'll have a chance to catch that if you've not already. And then also continuing with that series, the following Wednesday, we will be at the Harbor Creek Township Municipal Building. Richard will be talking about seeing George Washington through the eyes of Lafayette, a new look at one of our founders. Okay, one thing I didn't mention, if you don't mind, join me in taking out your mobile devices, place them in silent or airplane mode, out of courtesy for tonight's presenters as well as fellow patrons. We do invite you to take photos and engage, just making sure that your phone is quiet and silenced during the conversation. Now, I've done plenty of intros and welcomes to the audience, and now is the time that I turn over to give the biography of the speakers. And if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it 1,000 times. These folks need no introduction. In the JES orbit, Scholars-in-Residence Drs. Andrew Roth and David Frew, and our publications director, Mr. Pat Cuneo, they need no introduction, but I want to start with some numbers, and then we'll do the conversation. In case you were wondering, and this is a big credit to our intern Luke for running this, if, in fact, you wanted to read all of On the Waterfront and all of Book Notes, how many times do you think you could listen to the Beatles' discography? 1? 2? How about 11? You could listen to it 11 times through. Which has more words? Drs. David Frew and Andrew Roth on these series, or J.R.R. Tolkien on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit? If you guessed the former, you are right. It is these two. Now, they need no introduction, but folks, let's talk a little bit about their background, how they got started, and let's start the conversation. So, here's Dr. David Frew, which we hope to recreate this summer at some point, giving a wonderful tour of Presque Isle, because you might know him from his 13,000-year history. He's written a number of books for us, and he grew up on Erie's west side as a proud bay rat. Now, I'll admit I didn't know what a bay rat was until I had a chance to meet Dr. David Frew. We'll get into that in a second. He has written years and had so many different adventures. We'll get to that. There is Dr. Andrew Roth, helping to introduce one of our events, the Global Summit. He has done so much for us as well, including the American Tapestry Project, which if reading wasn't enough, you can tune into his work on WQLN, NPR, public media to be able to listen to the American Tapestry Project, a series that started here at the JES back around 2018, exploring the American story and the year that America shattered in 1968. But he's also the director of the Ramey Fellowship Program and so much more for us. Now, I think a good place for most stories to start tends to be the beginning. Your journey with us has several different beginnings, but Dr. Frew, I want to start with you. The pandemic, that's when these series both launched. Let's start with On the Waterfront. The idea, when did it come to you? How did it come to you? Because in March of 2020, a lot of us were wondering, what's next and what do we do? You took to your keyboard.
Well, we were brainstorming, and I was thinking, I have a long-term interest in parenting, because I was one, still am one, I guess. It's a job that never ends. And one of the interesting things that I sometimes reflect about was, in my neighborhood, we sort of were out of the house and gone and who knew where until the street lights came on. The rules for us, we should be home as soon as the street lights came on. We might have been any place. I recall one crazy time riding our Schwinn bikes to Cook's Forest. Just stupid. We ate our entire lunch before we got to Waterfront. We got to Cook's Forest and we were thinking, we were just little kids, like sixth or seventh grade, thinking we're going to be in big trouble here because it's 5 o'clock and we just got to Cook's Forest and we're pretty sure we're not going to get home before the lights go out. We got to ride home in a truck. We did the craziest stuff, and if any of my kids had done that stuff, I wouldn't have known what to do. But we all did that, and we somehow survived it. And it says something about what it was like in the 1950s and what it's not like now. And when we were brainstorming and thinking, what could I write, I was thinking might be kind of fun to write some recollections. People love old stuff about the 1950s on the bayfront, and I lived that, and I could do it quite easily. When I started, I was thinking, well, I'm probably good for a dozen of these, but I don't know where I'll go after that. Well, I would write one, and somebody would say, well, how about this? Well, how about that? And, you know, the people reading them would give me 3 or 4 more great ideas. So it's been just a joy to write this, and I'm still doing it.
So, Dr. Roth, day one, the first book note. How did it come to you, the idea? Where did you see it going? Because, David, as you mentioned, maybe a dozen, but then suddenly there was this momentum and velocity that took off. So, Andy, for you, the idea to start this series?
Actually, the idea was Ferkie's. Ferkie called me up and asked me, or actually called me up and told me, he said, we're not going to be able to have face-to-face programming for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe a month until they figure this out. And he said, do you think you could write, he said, you read a lot. He said, do you think you could write a book note every week for the next couple of weeks? So I said, sure. And here we are 5 years later and 200 and whatever it is, book notes later, and still doing it. That first one, actually, I kind of scrambled for the first one, but I was reading Joan Didion at the time. Joan Didion is one of my favorite people. You probably wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with her because intense would be an understatement. But I I was reading Joan Didion, so I just wrote a book note about Joan Didion, and I looked it up today. The very first, Pat will get a kick out of this. Very first book note was like about 1,800 words, and something like 1,200 of them were hers. They seem to have metastasized since then.
So slightly longer today, Pat, for you in the early days of now suddenly two of the folks that are no strangers to our orbit, now writing and producing. One of the other remarkable data points, I think, around publications is that pre-pandemic, we were averaging, what, Pat, maybe a dozen publications a year, and then suddenly it was 120. Talk about the volume, talk about the exchanges of what it was like to suddenly be working with these two, maybe drawing back from some of your paper experience, working with writers, developing stories, seeing how the story is unfolding, not knowing where the ending was going to go, whether it was going to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks without in-person programming, let alone a year plus in terms of that. What was that like for you, Pat?
Well, thanks, Ben. This is very nice of you to put this program on. For me, you could tell how desperate we were that we had to rely on these guys. Now, the truth of the matter is that I do come from a writing and editing background, and I do like to push things, and I probably do keep the trains running on time. But I really do not edit these guys. I just clean up a little bit of things. The true editors, Marianne Frew, Judy Roth, if it gets out of the house, it comes to me in great shape. And so kudos to the wives and editors out there. And the only other thing I would say is that it's been an absolute pleasure. These fellas are so smart and they're so quick and they're pros. They love writing, and none of us are kids. We love this, or we wouldn't be doing it.
Surely isn't for the pay.
That's true. So thanks, Ben. Thanks for asking.
So real quickly, though, a round of applause for Marianne and Judy in supporting that. And anybody in your lives that supports this kind of work, so valuable, I think, the behind-the-scenes work. And I think that's why I was so honored to have Pat up here and wanted to start with just the increase of volume of what the JES was able to do and is still able to do today of that pivot, that shift, and how we've grown, because really a lot of work does. Pat, I think you're being a bit humble in the work and the coaching and the dialogue and the back and forth, but so appreciative of your role in this and really growing the publications division for the JES with these two. Now to a really important question. David, what's a bay rat?
I was at work one day, I can't remember what job I had, and a fellow that was a fellow bay rat, we didn't know we were bay rats, came walking into my office with a picture of he and I and a couple of our associates. We might have been 9 or 10, and it was a black and white picture of us wearing dungarees, not jeans. Dungarees that cost $3 at the Army surplus store, and nasty white T-shirts that were no longer white. And our hair, I don't know, our hair looked like a bunch of people had been swimming in the bay and didn't have combs or brushes, and we didn't. And he said, "This is why they called us bay rats."
How many in the audience would self-identify as a bay rat? You've grown up in the area, you identify with David, so we have some. So circle tonight that we can identify and talk about. Andy, one of the things that I think is remarkable about the book notes is not only diving into the books, and I want to talk about some of the ones that you've reviewed, but you also have spent quite some time talking about poetry and spending time reviewing poems, and not explicating them, because you can talk, you have a great line about working a poem to death, but sometimes just enjoying
Billy
it.
Collins line.
And so, one, I want to hear that line. Two, what draws you to poetry to write about that in book notes and to welcome an audience into sometimes what can be a more challenging topic if you didn't have a good teacher along the way. The poetry can seem inaccessible, yet you make it accessible.
When I first met David 55 years ago, We were both faculty members at Gannon. He was a senior faculty, or at least more senior than me. I was a fresh out of graduate school instructor at the very bottom of the totem pole. And the first boss I ever had was a gentleman by the name of John Rao. Some of you in the room might know him. He was also the best boss I ever had by a wide margin. But in any event, being the junior member of the English department, I got to teach poetry to, how to describe them? The class, we didn't use the word remedial or developmental education then. They didn't use that then, but I got all these kids, and they were, well, I wasn't much older than they were actually at the time. I think it was 23 or 24, but they were 18. But they were the kids who just, poetry, like, oh my God, what is this torture? And so I used to enjoy teaching those classes because at the end of the semester, they were into it. And of course, I started out by cheating. I started out by, in those days it was hard to do. You had to find a record player. Remember those? And bring records into class. I'd play rock music for them, and then we'd talk about the lyrics in rock music. And I say, you've been listening to poetry all your life and you just didn't know it. So now let's read some good stuff. And that's how I got, well, no, I didn't get into it by that, but I came to it for that. I've always enjoyed, interestingly enough, I've always enjoyed teaching the classes with people who didn't want to be there. Because those are the most challenging and the most rewarding. Poetry, though, is something that I've loved for a long time, and I actually happen to think it's probably the highest art form. And it's usually shocking, even a very literate audience like this, to realize you probably live in the greatest era of American poetry. I mean, the internet is just awash in it. Books are sold. They're not rock star pop famous like they once were. In the 19th century, Longfellow was like a rock star. He was just huge. That isn't true anymore, but there's an astonishing amount of poetry being written by some really incredibly talented people. The majority of whom, interestingly enough, are women. I've spent the last, 7 or 8 months reading the complete poetry of Louise Glück in the order in which she wrote it. She's phenomenal. She's actually my contemporary. But the line about poetry is, the reason most people don't like poetry is they think it's a puzzle you're supposed to solve. And they had teachers who didn't know how to approach it, who then approached it like it's a puzzle you're supposed to solve. And the Billy Collins line is, most people think, you strap a poem to a chair and beat it with a rubber hose until it tells you what it means. And in the process, you kill it. So I refuse to explain, as you know, what it means. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
I'd like to steal a question here, if it's okay.
Pat, steal away.
Both of you have written beautifully about Mary Oliver. And first, Dave, in your in the book, which is a moving picture in many ways of Presque Isle, you quote her liberally and beautifully. Tell us what it is that brought you to her.
Well, my wife, Marianne, is the poet. I'm not. I was introduced to Mary Oliver by my daughter. And I think we have a couple of her books laying around, and I just love her poetry. I don't try to understand it. I've given up on it. Marianne's made me appreciate poetry, although I'm certainly not competent with respect to it. But I really love Mary Oliver, and she's a neighbor. She's from Ohio. She writes about stuff that I can connect with.
Thanks, Andy. Actually, before David's book and before him, delving into poetry, what brought you to her?
I think my wife Judy really likes her. I think Mary Oliver is arguably one of the sanest people you'll ever meet. There's no pretense in what she does. She uses plain, everyday language. And what she does is draw you back into the world by showing you the world. I talk in the book notes a number of times. This is true in any medium, but it's particularly true in the verbal arts. The greatest artists never tell. They don't tell you, if they're telling you what they're trying to tell you, then they're not very good at what they're doing. The greatest artists show it to you. And in showing it to you, you feel it. And she does that. She can do that in words. I'm trying to think of some examples of it. But David's right. She's actually from Cleveland, Ohio. She grew up in Maple Heights, Ohio. She never graduated from Ohio State. And actually, I probably passed her in the hallway. She was the writer-in-residence at Case Western Reserve in the late 60s, early 70s when I was doing I've gone to school too many times, but in any event, in the late 60s, early 70s, I was doing graduate work in English at Case, and she was the writer-in-residence, but Case managed to offend her. One of the great ironies, David may have a comment about this, one of the greatest ironies is that in college English department, this is actually true in almost every college arts department, whether it's the visual arts, the musical arts, or the verbal arts, poetry is. The least respected person in the group is who? The artist in residence. All the scholars look down on him, and I actually got into an argument with the ones. I said, you realize you spend your whole life studying what those people do that you were condescending to. Is that a fair statement?
Totally fair.
Anyways, Mary Oliver didn't suffer that very well, and she just left. She's a wonderful writer.
So one of the things I don't want to skip over, and David, let's start with you. What was a young Andy Roth like? You two knew each other decades ago. So take us back to the campus of Gannon University. And then in fairness, and be kind, because I'm going to give Andy the next opportunity to tell us
He just threatened me.
what a young David Frew is like. There are no threats. Let's be kind. This is a PG, maybe PG-13 audience. So take us decades back. What was it like being together on the campus of Gannon University?
Well, in 1970, when Andy and I both started, academia was wild. They were hiring 25, 30 new faculty every year at Gannon. That's just an astonishing thing. Somewhere in my archives, I have a photograph of all of us new guys sitting, being photographed, I believe, in the old Playhouse when it was on 7th Street. And there was so many of us, it was unimaginable. And I was here fresh out of doctoral school. I was a few weeks away from having my doctorate because Gannon was opening its MBA program. And I was hired to teach MBA students and to run the program. In fact, all my time at Gannon, I never taught an undergraduate class. I know that's a crazy thing. And yet I always felt like the English department and the guys that Andy hung out with, and John Rao, who was my favorite boss, he was my boss for a while as well, were amazing, just amazing people. So here I'm teaching people that want to be Fortune 500 rock stars, and they're teaching poetry and literature. And I loved what they were doing, and I was attracted to it.
Andy, take us back to the campus. What do you remember from decades ago, the interaction between the departments, knowing a young David Frew?
Well, I do remember that David and I had a mutual friend who was a very close friend of mine, who it turns out is the only person you're ever likely to meet in your life who has 2 PhDs, one in medieval literature and one in computer science. Now, his degree in medieval literature is in linguistics and Old English, so if you think about languages as symbol systems, it's not quite as crazy a leap as you think. But there was a group of people hovering around that, and it was the 60s. And so being on a college campus, it was the 60s. It was fun. I don't really want to go too far. But it was fun. But I'm going to say this. I'm going to embarrass Dave. I don't mean to embarrass him. Years late, well, not all that many years later, about 8 or 10 years later, and how you get from being in English department to doing what along the way, John Rao and I started the radio station at Gannon, and I got very interested in media and communications and film. And I founded a communications department at another local school, and I was thinking about doing this, and I discovered the business of media is actually the business of media. So I decided what I wanted to really do is get deep into advertising. I mean, I'm an endlessly curious person, which has its problems, but it's actually all worked out in the end. But I decided to get an MBA, so I'm the only person, David, who I probably turned down Carnegie Mellon to go to Gannon because I made the decision Gannon was 5 miles away and Carnegie Mellon was 125. And at the time, I thought I was leaving academia, and I didn't really care about the imprimatur. But anyways, all of that's by way of getting to the fact that I also had David as a teacher in a course in organizational theory and behavior. And David is one of the 3 or 4 best teachers I've ever encountered in my life. And he'd be right near the top of the top 1 or 2. He's a phenomenal teacher. And I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
What role, what impact does having been a teacher, you're both teachers, you're both educators, you're both leaders, what role do you think having been a teacher and an educator plays in your writing and how you approach writing? David?
Well, I was gifted with students that were at the beginning older than me, smart, accomplished people, and I learned from them. Like one of my very best examples of, if you ask me all my all-time best graduates, there have been a lot, including Andy and Detmar, who we were just talking about. There's a guy by the name of Bob Alexander who came to me. He was a retiring vice president at Lord, and he might have been 55 or whatever, and I was like maybe 30. And he said he wanted to learn everything he could learn to do something good for the world. And one of the things that Bob Alexander created during his time at Gannon, which I think is spectacular, is, I don't know if you've seen the bumper sticker that says coexist. That was Bob's invention. He spent several years on that, and there's a gazillion of those sticking on cars all over the place, a couple in my neighborhood. So that was one of the accomplishments of one of my very best graduate students, a guy that I learned a lot from.
Andy, for you, the role of being an educator, how does that influence how you approach writing?
I don't like the word educator particularly.
What word would you use?
Teacher. It's hard to answer that question exactly. One of the things is, just like with students, you always have to respect your reader. And with students, you have to respect the students. The mark of a really good teacher is the ability to be demanding without being demeaning. And there's very few teachers who've actually mastered that technique, the ability to be demanding without being demeaning. So you have to respect your student and listen to them. And I really do enjoy the feedback I get from readers. And the one thing I think being a teacher has done, because what I write is different in some ways than what David does, is an occupational hazard of being a teacher is you want to explain it. And because you're not sure they've got it, you repeat it. And so thanks to you and Pat, you control for that. Because, you say it once, and then you just want to make sure they got it, so you say it a second time. And then if you're truly a neurotic teacher, you say it a third time. And that might work in a classroom, but it doesn't work so well in an essay.
Well, so speaking of the role of editor, and you mentioned feedback, Pat, when did you know that these were sticking? Because let's go back to the beginning for a second. If we are in this time of uncertainty, this seismic shift in how we are existing, how we are processing, maybe there's a dozen of each of these, maybe we're back in person soon. We didn't know what was coming, but yet it's stuck and it continues to go. You see the incoming with feedback because you're part of these dispatches going out weekly. When did you start to know from our readership we're on to something with these 2 series?
Immediately. And first, for everyone who may not know, and you probably do, Ben is an outstanding writer and editor himself, and was a teacher, and is doing a great job as our vice president here. We were not just scrambling in the beginning. We were trying to figure out if we're going to be doing streaming and turning publications into something that people can read regularly. They have to be shorter. They have to be appealing to a broad base. And so these are my own biases maybe, but in David, in your case, it wasn't just Bay Rats, and it wasn't just West Sider. As an East Sider who had sewer rats, I could appreciate this, but it was the universal appeal. So right, you sort of alluded to this earlier, kids, seeking adventure, your passions, Lake Erie, Presque Isle Bay, the peninsula, pretty much anything that's interesting, the movie theaters, downtown Erie, many of the things that you've written. I think some of your most moving things, just like last week, 2 weeks ago, did a great piece on George Hesch, the great basketball player and coach at Gannon, and that moved greatly, including maybe you might add that his daughter contacted you and was moved by
George was my cousin's. My family is from upstate New York, from Frewsburg. I don't know, that's probably amazing. And there wasn't much going on in Frewsburg, so most of them moved to Warren. So I have tons of relatives in Warren. And my cousin, who turned out to be a physician, did quite well academically, lived right next door to George Hesch. And so when I was a little kid, I got to meet my cousin. I would spend a lot of time in Warren, got to meet George. And could be that George was inspirational in getting me to go to college. I didn't imagine myself going to college where I grew up. Not everybody even went to high school, much less graduated. You got to walk to 12th Street, get a great job, and buy a 1950 Mercury and shop and channel it with all the money you would make up there. But George maybe inspired me to go to college, and I started out, of course, as a chemistry major because he was a chemistry guy. Which, he talked me out of in the middle of my first year, thankfully. But George was an inspiration in so many ways. I watched him play at Gannon, and I watched him coach. And I wanted to say something nice about him and about the old days of Gannon basketball, when the Audi was jumping, and when Gannon was playing teams like Canisius and St. Bonaventure and people that we should still be playing. I think Mercier's did something really clever by going D1. I wanted Gannon to do that years back. But it was wonderful reaching out to talk about George and the influence he had on my life as a teacher. And I somehow reached his family, because several of his family members are now calling and talking to me and telling me things I never knew about George, which are pretty exciting.
I could just follow up, Andy. Similarly, in your book notes, these weren't just book reviews. We could just run book reviews, but what Andy did is he brought himself into all of this, and he expanded it into notes, the context of what the person is saying or what they're doing or how their lives have changed over time, or their writing, all the context of that. So yes, they run a little long, but they are so terrific. And I don't know how this guy references everything. It's really remarkable. The source work in this work is truly an academic feat. And so, that is really, I think, remarkable. So how did you do it, and how did you expand that idea?
I don't really know how to answer that question. No, they really aren't book reports or book reviews as such. I use them as points of departure to talk about the things I'm interested in. And so I try to turn them, I don't know if I'd call it a blog. It's kind of a blog, but I just kind of use whatever the book happens to be as a point of departure, and then I talk about wherever that point of departure leads me. What I find really interesting, and through all of them, I looked at today how many of them I've written, and it turns out 57 of them are on poetry and 52 are on history, which probably means I haven't grown up since I graduated from John Carroll, since I double majored in English and history. Almost triple majored in philosophy, just ran out of time. I look at them as the essay. The word essay, I'm not going to turn it into a lecture here, but the word essay comes from Montaigne, and it comes from the French. And if there's somebody in the room who can speak French, you would know that essai, E-S-S-A-I, is the verb to attempt, to try. And Montaigne invented the personal essay in the 16th century. Actually, he's probably the first blogger, because I wrote a couple about Montaigne. And what he was trying to do was to understand himself and what made him interested. And so he called his writings essays, meaning attempts to understand. And I think of the book notes as attempts to understand. I'm trying to understand the topic. It's an old line. You probably know this from journalism, but if most people have, when asked, why do you write to find out what you're thinking. And the only way to really find out what you're thinking is to write it, because that forces you to put some order. Because you can just riff into a tape recorder and it may or may not make sense to a third party, but writing imposes some order on it, and you try to figure out what it is you're thinking. And one of the great things I like about poetry is, I say the greatest poets are the greatest artists in any medium make you more present to the present. That's what they do. They take you out of yourself and help you see the world around you. And so without any pretending to do what some of those people do, I try to use the essay in that same way. So I've written a great deal about the experience of being an American. That's what the American Tapestry is about. Because I think actually it's the single most important question of our time. If we don't answer that, then it may be over and something else will happen. I'm supposed to do a week at Chautauqua this summer, the third week or second week in July, on the future of the American experiment. And I've actually a couple of times thought of just calling Scott up and saying, I've got a problem. I won't be able to do it because I'm having a hard time coming up with an answer to that. But I do the writing in some ways to figure out what it is I'm thinking about. And what I think a lot about is, in fact, the American experiment in the story of America and how it got so fractured. I don't know if that answered your question.
That's a pretty good answer.
Long.
So in Andy's defense, one of the things that I will say for the length, and we'll talk some numbers here in terms of the word counts, and including how many times we can listen to the Beatles discography, which is 11 for anybody that didn't catch it on the front end. One of the greatest compliments I've given you over time, Andy, is that they read much shorter than they actually are. And David, for yours, they read deeper. Even though they're shorter pieces, they hit very deeply. And the reason that I think that about both of your differing styles and your differing approaches is that you two have really found your voices. And while you might be wrestling with what the subject matter is, you've found your voice. I think for writers, that's one of the great struggles is who am I and how do I present this story? I know this is a loaded question to say, when did you discover it? What was your aha moment? But when did you get comfortable with how you tell the story so that then you could wrestle and beat up the details of the story? David?
Well, I started out my career as an engineer, and the fundamental skill that I always fell back upon to do whatever, including my academic life, was mathematics and statistics. And when I went to graduate school in '68, we got preached at about the importance of writing. So we had a dean that used to say to us that you need to write 2 or 3 hours every day, and then management for you will be to figure out what to write, what not to write, and how to use the stuff that you're writing. So I've been writing for a long, long time. But to be fair, most of my earlier things look kind of like engineering reports. And there was a moment in time when we got a new dean at Gannon who said, if you want to continue teaching this and that course where you're really not published, you're going to have to learn how to do some case writing. So I switched from being a quant jock kind of writer to a storyteller, case study guy. And I was mad at the time, but she did me a favor. And that's when I started doing Lake Erie stuff, shipwrecks. I got caught up in something that I really loved. And of course, I'm a water person. Spent a lot of time out in the middle of that water for whatever reason. And that shows up in my writing as well. So I don't know, somewhere in the middle of my writing career, I switched from being a mathematician / statistician / engineer type. The fewer the words, the much more the better. I used to tell my students, there was a little joke there that nobody ever caught when they were students, maybe I'm a storyteller.
Andy, for you. discovering your voice, getting comfortable with it?
I don't know that I've actually gotten comfortable with it. As you know, I'm currently working on a short book on leadership, and almost anything that you read about it, I make the comment in the book that if you were to enter into any search engine, leadership or leadership books, if you say just leadership, you get something like 7 million hits. If you say leadership books, you get something like 74,000. I haven't read 74,000 books on leadership. I don't pretend to be a leadership scholar, but I am a student of it, having done it for so long. And then I became a student of it when I got my first really important job where I was the boss, and I realized rather quickly I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, Jesus Christ, I have to figure this out because... And so what I discovered is most of those books say some version of the same thing when you cut through all the clutter, that it's actually quite simple. And one of the things they say is that leadership isn't something you do, it's something you are. And it takes a lifetime to learn how to do it, and you never actually ultimately finish that. And so I don't think I've actually finished. I'm still learning. I'm still, I try to keep an open mind. I wouldn't say that childlike innocence, but a willingness, this is a Mary Oliver line, a willingness to be surprised. John Wooden had the greatest line ever I read, and I'm using that in this book. You begin to learn the really important things after you think you know everything. You know, the really important lessons occur after you think you know everything. And so I just try to keep an open mind about it. And I look at each book note as actually an opportunity in some ways to tell a story, but more importantly as a way to learn something. I'm endlessly inquisitive or curious. And so I found it as just, the real great pleasure in writing them is to learn something. And so for example, once I get done with this book, as my wife will tell you, I'm not really good at retirement at all. I'm terrible at retirement. I'm going to write a book on the history of Christmas. So one of the really exciting things I got out of doing all of this, at one point I started a series on American holidays, and I was looking at today, I think I've written 14 or 15 book notes on Christmas. And Christmas is really important in trying to figure out the American story. Because it turns out the way you celebrate Christmas was invented in the middle of the 19th century by a group working independently of about a half a dozen people trying to knit together and create a common culture. And so the American way of Christmas was a 19th century attempt to create or part of a 19th century attempt to create a common American culture. It's actually much newer than most people think. And so you just keep learning things. In fact, the American way of Christmas may be the great genius of American culture. But that'd be another, well, there's 14 of them if you want to read them.
And so I think that's one of the joys that I've been privileged to experience with Pat, just serving as a helper alongside the publications division and getting a back-end view of these as they come in. But Pat, part of what I think is so important about this process is the role of the editor. As good as writers can be, sometimes I think the editor helps adjust that focus. Whether we widen it, whether we narrow it, we help the writer see something else. For you and your approach, because you've played a hand in every single word that has gone through this. And earlier I said, which is longer, Lord of the Rings or These Two Gentlemen's series so far? And it was, in this case, the latter. I framed it differently.
You know, can I tell, there's a great Lord of the Rings joke. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, the guys who, J.R.R. Tolkien was part of a group of Oxford Dons who met called the Inklings. And I'm drawing a blank at the moment on the pub that they always had lunch at. And amongst those Inklings was J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, I forget the other two guys. They were equally as famous historians. And one day, Tolkien came in at lunch and he said, I've got a new story I want to tell you about. And C.S. Lewis said, oh, Jesus Christ, not another goddamn elf You wouldn't expect C.S. Lewis to say that. And if you go to this pub, they have the thing on the wall. Actually, he even said it more pungently than I just did.
And if I could just sneak a little bit in to give you an example of what real leadership is, and I'm not sure what that is, even though I have a degree in it, it's sitting right there between us, Pat. He makes us want to do what we need to do, and he knows how to work with us, and he wants you to think that we're perfect writers and that everything comes out of my house or Andy's house is already fine, but it's not. He does more than he wants you to know that he does.
Well, that's pretty nice of you to say, but that hit a note with me on. I'd take a stab at this. If you guys are such good writers, David, in your case, there's no, you are a storyteller. You are a narrative writer. You tell the story. There's no eyes. There's first person understood, and we're weaved through like a director would direct a movie. And that is a tremendous skill. So not only requires practice, you have refined that. So we're seeing right where you want us to see the adventure. And also, Andy, you're a totally different style, but really same deal. No question of voice, no equivocal, someone else is taking me here, or that you are going right where we're being led, and so all I am is a reader with a discriminating eye sometimes.
But the humble medium through which this passes. No, Pat, I mean, it is so important, the role that you play. And I echo these two and not saying by any stretch that they're not terrific writers. You absolutely are. But I think that's part of the joy of this experience is the experiment of the writing and the storytelling and how we unfold. I want to look through the canon here. And David, I want to start with you. So total publications. You're making Cleveland proud. It's 216. Total word counts, 455,583. Now, if you read all of the pieces in one sitting, and maybe there's a Penn State Barron student, they just did something where they were watching or interacting with virtual reality for a time, it would take 40 hours to do this, whether somebody could stay awake that entire time. And average words per publication, again, deep, beautiful descriptions, 2,100 words. What was the most fun piece, the funnest one that you had to write, that you really enjoyed, that you think is worth calling attention to tonight so that either folks can relive it if they've read it, or they go home and this is what they're thinking to read first? What stands out in your mind?
Well, there's lots of them, and I don't know how to choose one, but something that's come to my attention this week is every year the Fish and Boat Commission pumps hapless trout into the two settling ponds at Presque Isle. And I love to go out and watch that happen. I'm a big lover of Presque Isle, water, fishing. Not much of a fisher myself, but the first year they did that and we went out to watch, we noticed sitting up in the trees a couple of osprey. And the osprey were in the water eating those trout and catching more than any of the fishermen that day. We went back the next year and the year after and noticed the same thing over and over again. So one of the early things that I wrote, I'm a bird guy, a water guy, a bay rat guy, a shipwreck guy. I wrote an essay called "How Does the Osprey Know?" Do they talk to each other? Do they have access to the internet? Are they connected to the Boat and Fish Commission? But on opening day, when they throw those trout in there, opening day for trout on the Presque Isle, there's always 2 or 4 osprey. We now have, by the way, 6 nesting pair of osprey on Presque Isle. Told that by the rangers at Presque Isle. I'm a huge supporter of the Sons of Lake Erie. Those guys do so many good things. And the last newsletter, if you watched it, they have photographs of pumping the trout in, and the Sons guys are out there passing out fishing poles and teaching kids how to catch fish. It's a wonderful thing that they do. They said the kids caught a lot of fish, but then they have a picture of the osprey coming in to catch probably more than any of the kids caught. Where does the osprey, or how does the osprey know that?
I'm really glad that you referenced that one, David, because that is one of my favorites that you've written, and just musing about wondering how they know that. But you've spoken several times tonight about being drawn to the lake, drawn to the water. You keep coming back to it. It's clearly a great focal point for you for this series, but also terrific books that you've written. What makes you a waterhound? What's drawn you in and won't let you go when it comes to Lake Erie?
Growing up on the bayfront, and the defining feature on the bayfront of my youth was the 6th Street Bridge. If you lived on the west side of the 6th Street Bridge, your life was controlled for you. You played golf. You went to tennis camps. You were a little bit more high end than the guys that I hung out with. And I can vividly recall sitting on the bluffs, looking at the water, thinking, "Wow, what's over there?" You could see over Presque Isle, wondering what's over on the other side, and seeing sailboats go back and forth. My favorite at the time was Enigma, and thinking, someday, I'd like to have a sailboat. So when I had the opportunity to move back here, and a completely patient and understanding wife, we bought a sailboat. We became sailors. We've been all over the lake in a sailboat, and our kids grew up on that boat as well. So it might have been just sitting, gazing, thinking, "Wow, that looks like fun. What would it be like to be on a sailboat?" And a little side story, one day I said to myself, I'm going to find out. And when the Enigma, that was the big wooden sailboat that would have been equivalent to Dave Beerig's Dreamer these days, went toward the yacht club and disappeared, I said to myself, I'm going there. So I went down to the waterfront and walked along the bay. It was one of the years when the water level was low, so you could walk past the Strongs estate on the beach, get a few wet feet, but we didn't care. And me and a couple of other guys snuck into the Erie Yacht Club thinking, well, we don't belong here, because that's stuff that happens on the west side of the 6th Street Viaduct, even though I'm a member now, and walked through the barbed wire gates over to where the Enigma people were, and we're standing looking like, when the security people grabbed us and said, out of here, let's give us the bum's rush right out of there, but water.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your storytelling is how localized it is, but how far it actually reaches. Because I remember, and I know we were talking about reach earlier, I remember for me, Pat, I loved your answer of immediately. We knew these stuck, but I remember getting an email from a reading circle during the pandemic that formed around wanting to read about Lake Erie, the waterfront, the bayfront. They were in Baltimore, and that they were meeting over Zoom to talk about your writing. Sometimes writing can seem like a lonely exercise, not knowing who's on the other end of the words, but having those kinds of reactions, those kinds of dialogue back and forth. David, what's that meant for you?
Well, that's incredible. I mean, writing is kind of fun, but you'd kind of like it even more if somebody actually read it. And the important part of writing is the reader, just like the important part of teaching is the student. And I've been so gifted, the responses I'm getting from, Florida, from people writing from England, and lots of them are people that grew up in Erie and wish they could be back here, but they don't know how to make it back till they become a climate refugee in a few years and have to get out of the hot South.
So sell Florida, buy Erie. That's what I'm hearing from you. Andy, let's take a look at your words for a second. So we did talk slightly longer. So word count, 851,681. Now, if you took all of the pieces, stack them together, 73 plus hours that we'd be reading. And yes, they did creep up from that very first Joan Didion piece at 1,800 words to now averaging nearly 3,600 words. Let's talk about the responses you've had, because part of your writing has been asking people to inform and guide what comes next, entering into a dialogue with a reader. And sometimes I think that At least when I've ever done that as a writer, there's a bit of fear in my gut of, will anybody respond? Does anybody actually care about this? Does somebody want to tell me what their favorite poem is? Is anybody reading? But you've entered into some really productive and fun dialogues, getting some feedback from writers, engaging with them. Talk about the experience of the back and forth over these many words.
Early on, some of the articles, some of the book notes that would have been, shall we say, more political, I had a long-going exchange with a fellow who shall go nameless, who doesn't agree with me. And that was kind of interesting. But at least we had a semi-civilized exchange back and forth. But I haven't heard from him in a year or two. And I'm not quite sure why. Maybe he just gave up and thought I was hopeless. The other thing would be, particularly on a lot of the ones that I write about poetry, I asked for people to respond with their favorite poems and what they were. And I was really amazed at, A, the number of responses I got. I'm not going to mention any names, who I got responses from. Quite frankly, some people I thought they probably had never read a poem, and it turned out, wow, they actually knew quite a bit about this. One of those people actually recommended, I'm drawing Sam McGee, The Ballad of Sam McGee, I think. The fellow who recommended that was not someone you would have expected to talk about somebody reading a poem about a guy who was a Klondike prospector and a drunk. And that was kind of interesting. But I got a lot of responses there, and that was gratifying. And actually, I think I wrote 3 or 4 book notes about the poems they talked about.
And so if we total up the total number of words, in case you were wondering, is it more than or less than 1 million? The answer is more than, and also longer than the entire Harry Potter series, if you add this up. One of the things that I again really appreciate is the opportunity to learn from you both and to see what you come up with next. So I want to see what's next from the audience to welcome you into the conversation, to ask some questions. While you're thinking about how to frame that, and again, reminding you, raise your hand, we'll come around with microphones. The what's next, I think that's also sometimes a fear for a writer, when the words don't come or the story's not there. I've never once doubted that between the 3 of you, that we're not going to get an On the Waterfront on Wednesday, we're not going to get the book notes or a reprise or something else that you're working on. Between the 2 of you, I've never thought there's going to be a loss. How do you grapple with the what's next? Where do you go? You've talked about some of your next projects, but dealing with that of, you never seem at a loss for words. David.
Well, I wrote once, one of the fun things in my neighborhood was the ragman who went through with the horse and wagon, and then the horse used to poop every place. It was just kind of fun. So I wrote a retrospective on the ragman, and I got a phone call immediately from Mark Tannenbaum, who said, "Hey, that was my grandfather. And you got some things right, you got some things wrong, come and see me." And I'm thinking, oh boy. So I went to PACA, and I had been there a couple of times. And Mark is just a fabulous guy and a student of architecture, and taught me so many things about the buildings, including the one that he's ensconced in right now with PACA. And by the way, I think he's one of the best play guys in town right now.
I wouldn't argue with you there. So the stories find a way to always keep going. Andy, how do you work with the what's next? Oh my gosh, the words are not coming, or is that not a problem? How do you deal with that?
I wouldn't say it's not a problem, but quite frankly, it's rarely a problem. One of the things is I'm endlessly curious, and I just like to learn. And I've got a whole new set of ideas that I want to work on that came out of last week's book notes. I mean, I'm working on this book on leadership. I call it a primer. It's going to be 125 pages or less. But in the process, again, Ferky sent me, he said, you know, Erie Insurance is 100 years old, and they just published a book on the history of Erie Insurance. Do you think you could do something with this? I thought, maybe. But in any event, I read it, and I've met possibly one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to know him. He died about 30 years ago. But it was the most recent book note, number 203, H.O. Hurt, the founder of Erie Insurance, just an astonishing guy. I don't know if anybody in the room read last week's book note, which is a profile of H.O. Hurt. So that got me thinking about who are the most important people in the history of Erie. And there is no Erie Hall of Fame. There happens to be in Cleveland a Hall of Fame of Clevelanders. I know that because when I was in Cleveland, I had the honor of introducing the man who was my mentor in Cleveland, Sam Miller. When he was inducted, he asked me to introduce him. So I was thinking that maybe we ought to create at the Jefferson and Erie Hall of Fame, and so who would be those people, and write profiles of them. And it's kind of like what I would tell young people when they would visit a campus. We were trying new staff members, and people would wonder about what's the school's mission. I said, well, one of the things you should do is go around and figure out who the buildings are named after and who those people were. Now, some of them were donors, but on many instances, they weren't donors. They were actually people who were of critical importance in the history or evolution of the institution. And I started thinking quickly who would be. I'd actually be interested in hearing from this audience, because you're Erieites and very well-informed Erieites. Who are the most important people in the history of Erie, particularly if I said no politicians at first. Because if I included politicians, I'm looking at Pat, I would actually nominate someone most people in the room haven't heard of, Orange Noble. I love Orange Noble. Anybody know who Orange Noble was? There you go. And we got to write something about Orange Noble. Well, actually, Pat already has.
Yeah, he was an Erie mayor who, among other things, he struck it rich in the oil business and came here and spent his money.
Yeah.
And was the first to build sidewalks in Erie, which
He was the mayor of Erie, what, about 1880, thereabouts, somewhere?
1870, maybe.
Yeah.
But I have to break bad news here. There is an Erie Hall of Fame.
There is? Oh.
Now, it's not really ballyhooed, but it's.
Well, maybe we should ballyhoo it.
Yeah.
Okay, I just learned something. Actually, Orange Noble made a fortune in the oil fields around Titusville, moved to Erie when somebody had the brainstorm that never happened of building a pipeline from Titusville to Erie. But he ended up the mayor of Erie, and the city had no money, so he spent his fortune building the sidewalks and roads. You think you're going to find a candidate like that?
Again, remember, tomorrow's election day. With that, I will say, three individuals that no doubt, if I were to build an Erie Hall of Fame, I'd put them in it, are these three. And again, I can't thank them enough for allowing me to be in their orbits, including for this conversation. We have talked a lot up here. I'm going to ask for a round of applause, then I'm going to ask for your questions. But again, a huge debt of gratitude for all you've gifted to us, the storytelling, the history, the notes, the education, the information, the dialogue that you've created. A round of applause for these three gentlemen. And now is the portion where we turn it over to you, the audience, because again, this is a celebration. We will be celebrating with some goods. Do not ask questions because you want to rush over to the champagne. We do have time for questions first. So we have a few. Raise your hand. We'll come around with the microphone.
It's our life's work, and there's no questions.
Well, the most important question, gentlemen, hold on to your mics. It's coming from our president, Dr. Ferky Ferrati.
Sorry, this is not a question. I just wanted to thank the four of you. You know, as a new American or foreigner, it's always good to have people who speak the language and can write. It just works beautifully. And we started the the Scholar-in-Residence program because I think for my culture, I just didn't understand why there is not more of a platform for when the young can learn from those who have achieved. And people like David and people like Andy and Pat and Judy Lynch and Joyce Savakia and so on, Charlie Brock, another one, they've amassed so much knowledge. And just when they are ready to teach this stuff, a lot of times people retire way too early. That's why we created the Scholar-in-Residence program to have an intergenerational learning opportunity, not for only you folks, but for the generations that are coming. So thank you to David, thank you to Andy for bringing your voice and bringing your knowledge and continuing to doing so, where you could be somewhere in the beach and relax instead. And you're teaching the community. So thank you. We owe you so much.
Here, here.
And of course, thank you to our president for encouraging that platform, allowing for it to happen, and all of you for being a part of this as well. Now, your questions. Time, do I see you positioned, ready to take a question? Thank you, you in the audience.
Dr. Frew, what is the name of your boat and why did you name it that?
Ashram. We've had 4 ashrams, and that's a retreat. We did some racing and crazy stuff, but it was mostly a retreat for us.
Hello. First of all, I'm a mupper, and I know you all should know what that means. I'm a transplant. And my question is really to you, sir, since I'm still learning Erie and its ways. Where is this Erie Hall of Fame that you said exists?
I can't remember the organizing group, but
Call on
David
David.
does.
When I was at the Historical Society, we kicked that off as an important initiative. And of course, one of my first inductees was a commercial fisherman. The guy who, by the way, invented freezing. And he lived 2 blocks from me. He was from Port Dover. But we inducted a couple of 3 people every year for my time. I was there 4 years, like 12, 14 people.
I remember Gertrude Barber was among them. Many of the big names of Erie history, the great magician who was the mentor to Houdini, Keller, who the comedy club is named for.
I sense an upcoming shared byline that revisits the Erie Hall of Fame and then thinks who else should be included. Other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I guess this would be to all of you. I don't know, maybe one can answer, maybe all of you have some thoughts on it. But just the idea of, you're writers, you're assimilating and reprocessing information, data, knowledge. Any thoughts on just this massive information that we're inundated with right now, from the internet, from groups, from publications, from all sorts of sources, I and probably everybody here, we could get on our phone and look at the news page in the morning and you could be on there all day. And it's not like junk, it's interesting stuff, it's valid stuff, and it just keeps coming and coming, and it's over, and it's overwhelming. And I guess I'm just wondering, what thoughts you guys have on managing this and keeping it under control and using it to the, to the best. Thanks.
That's a really good question. I think one of the worst things that happened in American culture in the last 25 years is the death of the daily news. I wrote a book note on it. What's happened is you've lost the group, the people that would do just what you were talking about, that could function as a reliable, more or less trustworthy aggregator and selector. And so now what you have is you're just awash, as you said, and some of it is astonishingly good, but there's also just an unbelievable amount of crap. And so I think the one thing someone has to figure out is how to build a business model that you can have something that approximates what the newspaper used to do. I firmly believe in something Malcolm Ford says: there's no such thing as a problem, there's only an opportunity in disguise. And I think there's an opportunity in disguise there, but I have to say, I've not figured it out. And when people come close to figuring it out, technology is changing so fast. There's a fellow I'm trying to talk Ben and bring to the Global Summit, Chris Quinn. He's the editor of it's Cleveland. Well, that's the whole point. He is nominally the editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, except the Cleveland Plain Dealer doesn't really exist anymore. It's cleveland.com, but he's the editor of it. And they actually have figured out a business model. They're one of the few local papers, but he just wrote a column on how now they're threatened by artificial intelligence because, and you may or may not have noticed this, if you do a search on Google or Bing, MSN, the first thing that comes up is an AI-generated summary essay that's actually usually pretty good. And if all you want is like a snapshot or even a little more than a snapshot, but a succinct but still semi-meaty answer, it's right there. And what happens, nobody ever scrolls down anymore. And media that have finally figured out how to get there, that's already been blown out of the water. And so I don't know the answer to that, but that you just asked probably the most important question in our culture. I'll get on a hobby horse for a moment. Tomorrow's election day. I'm not going to mention any candidates, but there are some candidates who wouldn't have had a snowball's chance in hell if actually the Erie papers still functioned the way the Erie paper once functioned. And I wrote a whole column about, and I know this is dear to Pat's heart, and I began it by saying, do you miss Larry Pintia? Do you miss Len Cole? These are Erie names. Do you miss Len Colas? And the answer to that was, as aggravating as they used to make me, I terribly miss them. Because that was the common ground. That was the community, the virtual community square. You could find out anything from Grandma's recipe there to what was going on in the theaters that weekend to the news, etc. And while you might not have always agreed with the editorial page, a couple of those guys, who shall go nameless, friends of colleagues of Pat, they had pretty accurate bullshit detectors.
Well, I count myself among them. That's a great question, Mark. Ben and I have done a number of programs on yellow journalism, disinformation, misinformation. I'd like to think we're in a period of transition, and that something is coming. And yes, AI, not just in terms of print media or video media. There have been fake photos that are getting better and better. It's a whole different world, and now you have to work to find valuable sources. And while I do read the summaries of the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal does one, many papers, major papers, the loss of daily papers is terrible, but less so in the last 3 years. So they're holding their own, even though they're getting worse and worse as a product, or maybe less timely, but they still run in depth. But the whole business of getting informed is so reliant on people now. You know, and I'm fortunate to, I think, have been in the newspaper business when it was thriving, and we had reporters who could go to the meetings of the authorities and find out before they reached council chambers, and not just the political sides of things, but the planning side, and having your feet in private business. But even though private business is important, public business is our business. It's where the money is and how our money is being spent, and that's a real challenge today. So I don't want to get on a soapbox, but this is a big issue. What do you think, Ben?
So I very much agree, and I think that it's challenging to think how we go back, you know, and I think we have a nostalgia for how things were and the trust, but I think it was really important what Pat had mentioned of we've seen struggles in the industry before, and so we are in a moment. If I had a magic wand, the first thing I'd do is clone these three so we have more coming out of them, and I say it half jokingly, but more seriously, it's having a Pat Cuneo on the JES team who filters the writing, looks at it, and we put our stamp of approval on the work that goes out. We say we can stand behind that. Now, we're not saying we endorse what any one of our writers or contributors might say. We're a nonpartisan think tank. But you know, a think tank has checked it, has filtered it, has processed the information. So we'd like to think that we're a reliable component in that ecosystem that you can turn to us. So I think it's more of that, and it's the loss of filter, the checker, the person who's actually verifying what's coming across the transom to say, this is actually well reasoned, it makes sense. It's worth sharing with an audience. It's worth eyeballs getting attention, not just the clickbait, grab attention, push it out for the sake of that. I turn back to thanking the three of them, but the important role of the editor and lifting that up in new ways, and I think that's one of the things we try to do here, at the JES. What I hear is champagne bottles about to pop and cake about to be sliced. But before I hear that, I hear a round of applause for these three gentlemen, their contributions, and what a milestone to hit, more than 200 publications each, more than 400 total. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Folks, stick around for some champagne, some cake, some merriment, some conversation, some one-on-ones. Tell them your favorite factoid, tell them your favorite piece, ask them your favorite question. Thank you all for coming tonight.